Tonight, will Congress enact big changes to ICE and the Department of Homeland Security? Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth tells us she has some red lines. Politics, power. The Epstein document dump exposes alleged grotesque behavior by so many of the nation's elite. But was Epstein also a spy collecting blackmail and trading it with foreign countries? 3.5 million pages, 3.5 million new questions. City Council closed a $1 billion budget gap, but a new study says the actual number is far greater. Try $41 billion. What? We explain.
Welcome to the Chicago Report. I'm Paris Schutz. We start with Stacey Davis Gates. She's the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, and she's going on temporary medical leave, stepping down from her role. Now, the union made the announcement earlier today, but did not give many more details. However, a spokesperson did note this leave was, quote, planned and anticipated. CTU Vice President Jackson Potter will serve as the interim president. Davis Gates was also recently elected to lead the statewide teachers union. Gates and CTU have been heavily involved in Mayor Brandon Johnson's agenda, as well as the Chicago Board of Education's search for a new CPS superintendent. And they sent a message to their members today. It reads, quote, we're grateful for her leadership and for demonstrating that as we pour ourselves into the work, we also have to care for ourselves to be able to keep going. In Washington, lawmakers have 9 days to agree on funding for ICE and the Department of Homeland Security. Earlier today, I spoke with Illinois Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth, who offered her red lines on a funding bill. It comes after Duckworth attended a hearing on Capitol Hill yesterday where Chicagoan Marimar Martinez testified about being shot 5 times by federal immigration agents during raids in Brighton Park in October. Martinez explained in detail the harrowing experience.
I knew I had to get to safety before I was dragged from my car and likely beaten or killed. I drove forward and went around the Border Patrol agents who jumped out of his car and pointed his gun at me. I moved to the far left lane, striking the curb on the far left side of Kedzie. The next thing I knew, I felt a burning sensation in my arms, legs, and that I had been shot by pepper balls. I remember the agents rushing the nurses to finish up so they could take me with them. I still felt dizzy. I was not able to fully process what had happened to me. After being at the hospital for less than 3 hours, I was discharged from the hospital and took custody of the FBI. As my attorney showed the court the disgusting text messages Exum sent to his fellow Border Patrol buddies, literally bragging about how many times he shot me, I got sick to my stomach, seeing how a federal law enforcement officer would talk this way about shooting me, a woman who he swore into. Was both eye-opening and heartbreaking. Silverio Villegas Gonzalez.
And now we're joined by Illinois Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth, who was present at the hearings yesterday. Senator Duckworth, thanks for joining us. You know, we heard these harrowing first-person accounts of what happened here in Chicago and Minneapolis. What was your reaction as you were sitting there in the committee room listening to this?
Well, number one, it was just horrific. Listen to Ms. Martinez talk about how she was shot, how she was pulled out of the hospital after having a gunshot wound, getting addressed, and then being pulled out of the hospital early, and the agent taking pictures of her face without her consent, and then she's sitting in an FBI office, bleeding onto the floor, begging to be taken back to the hospital. I remember she was shot. I think it was 5 bullets, 7 wounds. Right. I think those were the numbers. And she was so compelling. She was so brave. She was so strong and firm and proud in her identity as an American, and that she was going to stand up for injustice. And so I was so proud of her and everything that she said yesterday.
And one of the attorneys, Romanucci, was saying that there isn't much recourse to sue a federal law enforcement agency like you could local police for misconduct. But is there some kind of recourse that Ms. Martinez and some of these other witnesses, remember we had the family members of Renee Good as well, other recourse they could seek for what happened to them?
You know, I think there are some, I'm not an attorney, I don't want to get into the details of that. I think some of the key things we need to talk about is preventing this from ever happening again. And making sure that we immediately establish guardrails to protect innocent lives from being gunned down by their own government. We can talk about some of the things that are happening in terms of recourse to these families. That's going to be ongoing. We can change some of the rules for that, but we also need to make sure that this never, ever happens again.
And how does this play into your position on funding for the Department of Homeland Security? Because as we know now, lawmakers have 10 days to come to some kind of agreement to fund that agency.
Right. So I'm not voting for another penny to go to ICE, to Trump's ICE, unless we have some of these guardrails in place. Trump's lawless agents are out of control. We need accountability. So number one, I think there should be independent investigations of ICE, right? So that when they're involved in these shootings, that it should just not be ICE investigating itself, investigating their own agents that are out there terrorizing people on the streets of our cities, that there should be independent investigation. Maybe it's a multi-agency between the Office of the Inspector General for DHS and FBI, but it definitely needs to have independent investigation. I think that we need to make sure that they remove their mask and are forced to wear body cams. One of the things we learned yesterday from Ms. Martinez is that ICE is keeping the body cam footage from her shooting, her attempted murder by this ICE agent. They're not turning that over. I think that should be made available. And then I also think that we need to keep them from being able to just range. And right now they're patrolling, they're allowed to range within 100 air miles from the nation's borders. So they can come through and walk on Amtrak trains and range in the streets of our cities. Lake Michigan is considered a border, which is why they were able to range in from all throughout Chicago. That needs to stop. We need to make sure that they're not allowed to issue their own warrants, and then they must be forced to use actual judicial warrants. So some guardrails are required. I think these are very basic ones that Americans are asking for. And if my Republican colleagues will agree to that, then I'll consider voting for the bill.
That's interesting reforms. And I was always confused by Customs and Border Protection considering this area a border zone, because if you cross Lake Michigan, as we all know, you get to Michigan, not another country. But, you know, there is the point of view that sanctuary policies and the rhetoric of local officials are contributing to some of this chaos. Should Democrats compromise by maybe softening some of these sanctuary policies so that there could be more cooperation?
Shooting at an American citizen. Ms. Martinez is an American citizen, born and raised in Chicago. I don't know what sanctuary they're talking about for an American citizen. Let's be clear. This is attempts by the Trump administration to shift blame onto the victims, right? Nobody, no matter where you are, if you're in the United States of America, deserves to be executed like Ms. Good was, like like Alex Pretty was, by ICE agents. That is lawless behavior. So let's be clear what we're talking about here. We're talking about out of control, under-trained ICE agents with no guardrails on them, terrorizing the streets of our cities. And I'm hearing from people, you know, in Illinois who are telling me this needs to end. Put some guardrails up, and that's what I'm attempting to do.
But to get a Republican buy-in to some of those issues, what about allowing Democratic cities to, let's say, honor ICE detainers? Because right now we know that in Illinois, the ICE detainers aren't honored unless they present a judicial warrant.
Well, the judicial warrant is one of those things, right? We do honor them when they have a judicial warrant. But right now, ICE is going out there with an administrative warrant where they get some random ICE officer to go ahead and sign a warrant and call it a warrant. That's not legal. I'm not going to support anything less than a judicial warrant, because a judicial warrant is what you need when you're going after criminals and violent criminals. And that's what supposedly they're supposed to be doing. But instead, they're picking up 5-year-old children and shooting Montessori preschool teachers 7 times on the streets of our cities. This is not acceptable. Judicial warrants should be the minimal standard.
I want to shift gears because, you know, President Trump's, and he seems to have a knack for making statements that then become huge news and distractions from other big things that are going on. But this notion of, quote unquote, nationalizing elections, he's basically doubled down, saying he wants Republicans in the federal government to take over elections, although there are Republicans that say, well, we should pass the SAVE Act, which would require voter ID. Why are Democrats against the notion of mandatory voter ID?
I'll give you an example. I had a staff member who was serving in the Navy. She came out of the Navy, mustered out of the Navy in California, where her last duty station was. She drove across the country to Illinois to work on my campaign when I was campaigning for the House of Representatives at the time. And so she drove across country, was in California, was in Illinois with me for a short time. I won the election. Then she moved to Virginia to work in my offices in Virginia, where she established residency. She was not allowed to vote because her driver's license, she had turned in her she was in the process of turning in her driver's license. So she still had a California driver's license, but she was in Virginia. She had a lease. She had her VA ID card. She had her federal employee ID card, and they would not accept her ID card. This is the issue that we get. We get people caught up in between movements. There are people who have a hard time getting documents. And we need to make sure that all Americans who can vote should be able to vote. But we don't make the rules so stringent that you are disenfranchising legitimate voters. And this was a veteran, and they wouldn't accept her VA ID card.
Oh, wow. Very interesting. Well, Senator Tammy Duckworth, a lot going on the Hill. Like we've said, it's like a week's worth of news in a single day, every day these days. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, back here at home, Chicago City Council passed a budget that closes a $1 billion gap, although Mayor Johnson has been going around town bashing that budget. He did not support it. But a new study by the watchdog group Truth in Accounting says the actual deficit is a wee bit higher than $1 billion. Try $41 billion. Wow. Joining us now is Judy Willard with the group Truth in Accounting. Hi, Judy. $1 billion is quite a bit smaller than, and that's a large number to begin with. $41 billion. How do you account for $41 billion as the actual number of the city's deficit?
Yeah, thanks, Paris. Thanks for having us on to talk about our report. Pardon me. This report will be live at midnight. So if people want to know more about it, they can get onto our website at truthinaccounting.org and read all the facts themselves. So what we do is we recast the government's numbers, and we use the same strict accounting rules that corporations have to use to prove to their investors that they're financially sound. Information people would want to know about a corporation before they invested in it. Now, however, government accounting is very different than corporate accounting. We have a little bit of an issue with that. We believe that if government were doing the same accounting as corporations were required to do, that the financial facts would be much more clear to the voters before they make their decisions, because we think the voters are actually not getting what they really are able to pay for. And our report shows that, because the $41.1 billion is our methodology of showing you all of the liabilities that Chicago has. And one of the greatest misconceptions is the fact that the pensions, they're so underfunded. This is clearly showing the city is not saving up. They're only putting 25 cents per every dollar promised into the pension fund. And that's creating this huge gap in liability. So it's something people need to be aware of every time the unions go back to the city and demand more, or when the Illinois General Assembly decides that all the tier 2 pensioners get, more money. Well, that money should be in the budget of the city council. But the way the accounting is done, they're allowed to keep that money. They don't have to pay the actuarially determined contribution into the pension fund. In Illinois specifically, the General Assembly sets the contribution amount instead of an actuary.
And Judy, if I
Now-
could, if I could jump in here,
Yeah.
so you're accounting for these massive pension debts, which the yearly budgets that the city passes doesn't really account for, although they do spend billions to even tread water for the pensions, and you've got borrowing that the city has somewhere around $19 billion. But how does Chicago compare to other cities of its size?
So Chicago's interesting because, again, because accounting rules are different. When you compare New York City to Chicago, New York City, by state law, because in the 70s they were so close to bankruptcy, the state law says New York City has to put in the actuarially determined contribution for their pensions. However, Chicago, when you look at their financial reports, they do not include the a lot of different, they don't include the school district. New York includes everything. So if Chicago were including the same thing as New York, Chicago would actually be in a much worse shape if the school districts were included.
And certainly we cover CPS as a separate body guard. We know their financial struggles are significant. Okay, Judy Willard, the report is going to be up at midnight. Truth in Accounting. Very ominous numbers here that every Chicago resident should look at, because guess who's on the hook? They are. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Paris.
You got it. And after the break, we talk to a legal expert to answer our questions about the latest Epstein drop. Any more charges coming? We'll see. $3.5 million documents raising 3.5 million new questions. A shocking glimpse into the alleged perverse and potentially criminal behavior from some of the country's most powerful political and business elite revealed in these Epstein files. But it goes further. There are emails suggesting Epstein was communicating with foreign governments like Russia or Israel or Saudi Arabia, and talking policy with former Trump aide Steve Bannon during Trump's first term. Either way, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche says no more investigations and no more files.
A lot of emails, there's a lot of photographs, there's a lot of horrible photographs that appear to be taken by Mr. Epstein or people around him, but that doesn't allow us necessarily to prosecute somebody. And that's what's important for the American people.
And joining us now is Northwestern Pritzker School of Law professor Ronald Allen. Professor Allen, thanks for speaking with us. My first question to you is, when you thumb through some of these documents and you hear the Deputy Attorney General saying, well, you know, we can't really charge anymore, there's no more prosecution to be done, does that hold water with you?
Well, I think I can understand where he's coming from. There are undoubtedly lots of charges that he could or they could make if they chose to, but they would not be easy to prove. And even though I think this was, to use your term, a perverse, I would say, hotbed of criminality, but that's different from actually having proof that any particular individual engaged in illicit sexual activity or whatever, versus just being on the premises. There are statute of limitations problems. And frankly, most striking of all, once you release all the evidence, it makes it very hard for a defendant to have a fair trial. So the release of this evidence, in one sense, almost makes it, as I say, impossible.
So perhaps tainting a jury pool. Did anything stand out to you? Obviously, we can't go through 3.5 million, but we see the trickle, that investigators or media organizations have gone through, and some of these are shocking. And names: Trump, Clinton, Gates, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, a highly influential and controversial Republican donor. What stood out to you?
Well, two things stood out to me. It's along the lines you just identified. The mind-blowing scope of this perverse activity, transaction, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's just amazing to me. I've never seen anything like it. The second thing is the mind-blowing stupidity of a lot of these people, like Clinton and like Bannon and like George Mitchell and Larry Summers. I mean, do they really think that no one would ever learn about this? I never met Epstein. He must be a very compelling person.
Well, and now we're looking at that picture of Clinton and a young woman. It's like, if someone's taking this picture, don't you wonder that it could be used as blackmail?
If you have a lick of brain, but there was, a lot of very smart people acted really, really stupidly. In terms of discrete activity, the thing that struck me the most, and by the way, of course, I have not viewed 3.1 million documents, is this pathetic person, Andrew, I guess his name is Andrew Windsor Mountbatten.
Mountbatten, sure.
Kneeling over a prone woman and then putting his hands on her back. Now, that's disgusting, and it triggers that reaction. Does it make a difference legally? Well, Britain is not going to turn over even a former disgraced prince to the United States for prosecution. The DOJ releasing another. So it's just not going to happen.
It's just stunning. I want to get to some of the allegations against Trump. I mean, he's mentioned by some counts tens of thousands of times here. The most salacious being from a tip line where we can't even discuss the monstrous, grotesque allegations in here. And what defenders are saying as well, I mean, this could be a bunch of hooey and it was never corroborated, or, when you look at this kind of evidence, does it look like the FBI adequately followed up on some of these tips?
I wish I could give you an answer to that. I mean, you can't really be fair in a context like this unless you have the inside information. I believe I know the case that you're talking about. And they did, in fact, follow up, and they couldn't locate the person, and she never resurfaced.
Right.
That happened a couple times. Is that unusual? Of course not. Is it unusual to make really salacious accusations against people and then disappear? No. I think this has been really disappointing for the Democrats with respect to Trump. I mean, it looks pretty clear that he did cut off ties to Epstein. All the women who they did interview denied that he was anything other than a gentleman. So, in a case like this, it's not at all surprising that these absolutely disgusting allegations are made.
And let's listen to what President Trump had to say in the Oval Office. I mean, he's clearly made his decision on these files.
I think it's really time for the country to get onto something else. Really. Now that nothing came out about me, other than there was a conspiracy against me, literally, by Epstein and other people.
What do you make of the redactions? I mean, a lot of folks that represent victims outraged that some of their names weren't redacted, but then we have potential participants whose names are redacted.
I was surprised at the failure to redact in many instances, and my guess is, and I may completely be wrong about that, was just the overwhelming nature of the problem. I mean, one of the questions you might want to talk about is the Transparency Act. Why didn't they turn these things over? Well, because there's 3.1 million of them, and you have to go through all of them and decide how to handle them. So my guess is, I don't know this, but my guess is a lot of it is just inadvertence, and it's too bad. When you ask about these prosecution, for example, you're also trading off the cost to other people. There are a lot of people probably who don't want to be part of this anymore, who don't want to testify, even if they had something to testify to. So it's an extremely complicated, sordid mess.
What about the stuff, the stuff that stands out to me too is a conversation with foreign government officials, Russia, Saudi Arabia. To me, it raises the question that beyond the trafficking, he was running, he might have been an agent for espionage and trading in secrets and blackmail. I mean, is there anything in here that stands out to you about the Foreign Espionage Act here?
I think you have just put your finger on the scariest aspect
Absolutely.
of this. It's standard operating procedure for adversaries to try to get information on people so that they can blackmail them. It's often done with things much simpler and less disturbing than this, like entice somebody into a relationship with a prostitute and entice somebody into a homosexual affair. And just single incidents like that can flip people and make them provide sensitive information. This looks to me like it could be related to that. And I completely agree with you. And I think it's scary beyond belief.
Especially considering the governments that he's talking to here. Can that be investigated? We talk about statute of limitations against some of the salacious sex-related stuff, and maybe there's nothing more that can be done here. But what about that aspect? Is there any more to look into or to investigate for prosecutors? And we just got news today that Poland is going to look into whether he was a foreign spy. Not the U.S., but Poland.
Well, again, I don't have inside information as to what their investigation has already been. In a context like this, the problem is the foreign governments, including our so-called allies, and Israel is an ally, are not going to cooperate unless there's some extraordinary thing going on in their own political landscape. So the idea that Russia would admit, yes, we are engaged in espionage through Epstein, it just isn't going to happen, and they're not going to make witnesses available or anything of that sort. And I doubt there's anyone other than Epstein or maybe Ghislaine Maxwell, who would know anything about that.
All right, Professor Allen from Northwestern Pritzker School of Law, thanks for your insights. I'm with you. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this or on this scope. We thank you for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. Nice to see you.
And that is our show for this evening. Join us again tomorrow for more Chicago Report. Have a safe night, everybody.